fact is that my company, Clark Patterson Lee, does a lot of work with cities. We love working for cities, and we love solving their problems. And my partner and I noticed a few years ago that one of the problems that they had was code enforcement and building inspections and building plan review, which all deals with codes. And so we started doing this work for cities in Georgia. So who are we? We're a 200-person professional services firm, and we played a large role in Town Center Park in Swanee, and we've been running the City of Dunwody's Community Development Department for many years, or actually since they were formed. And in March of this year, we were lucky enough to get a contract from Lawrenceville to provide code enforcement services in the commercial areas of town. And those services consist of two things. They consist of proactive patrolling of the commercial areas and then inspection of multifamily housing. And so I'll talk about proactive patrolling first. We initially focused on signs. The City Council and the business community went through a fairly comprehensive rewrite of your sign ordinance, and then later we focused on some zoning issues. We've got 3 officers with iPads that proactively patrol the commercial corridors. Actually, one of those folks is a city employee, and 2 of the folks are Clark Patterson Lee employees. And the iPads are linked to some technology, some cloud-based technology that allows us to enter stuff on the fly in the field. And so since March, we've investigated 948 cases, and about 64 of those are currently open. And so because I'm a civil engineer, I like numbers, and I like to be able to show my client that what we're doing is actually paying off for them, that they're spending their money wisely. And so we look at what kind of cases are we opening, and there's essentially 4 categories. We've found some unlicensed businesses. We found a bunch of property maintenance violations, some zoning violations, and then illegal signs. And illegal signs are pretty much the largest portion, about 70 to 80% of the violations that we found. The other thing that I like to look at is what kind of compliance we're getting, because the program that we're implementing is really designed to educate the business owners about what the code says, and then give them an opportunity to come into compliance before we issue citations and get the court involved. And so it's really important that we give them time, that we explain to them what the code means, and we give them time to correct it. And so what we track on a monthly basis is, of the cases that we open, how many can get complied on the first visit? How many are complied with on the second visit? How many are still waiting for compliance? How many are pending court action because we just couldn't convince the property owner to come into compliance voluntarily? Is there a question?
In general terms, can you define what a sign violation is? In using general terms, what are you talking about?
Sure, yeah. The sign ordinance essentially defines what kind of sign, the size of the sign that you can have, the number of signs that you can have on your property. It does not deal with content of the sign. That's a First Amendment issue, and the city does not regulate content. And so cities regulate typically the size, the number of signs, and that sort of thing. And so we have been implementing that code and found lots of people that whose signs were too large, or they were putting signs in the right of way, or they were the signs that they were erecting, that sort of thing. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, close enough, thank you.
City Council also wanted to know, when we look at the different commercial corridors in the city, how many of the violations that we're finding are violations of the sign ordinance versus violations of the zoning ordinance, or violations of property maintenance codes. And what we found is what we found is that roughly 70 to 80% of the violations that we've tackled so far in the commercial areas are sign violations. Another 20% are zoning violations. And then the balance is property maintenance and unlicensed businesses. So let me talk about some zoning case examples. Of the 948 cases that we've looked at, 248 of those have been zoning cases, and 19 have been unlicensed businesses. And then we also initiated a joint task force with Gwinnett County Fire Marshal to abate some egress violations. And I'll show you some pictures of that in a minute. So this is an example of a zoning violation where we had a prohibited use outside the facility. Essentially, it was a mechanic, and they were repairing vehicles, outside of their facility. And so we talked to them about that. There were several businesses. One guy even had a lift installed outside. So this is what it looks like after this business came into compliance voluntarily. They moved the lift inside. This is another prohibited use. Basically, they had parts and junk vehicles that were just being stored in the parking lot. And they abated that voluntarily.
It's not education a lot, is
it is. It's a lot about education and giving the business owners an opportunity to come into compliance. So you go to them, you explain the code. How much time do you need? It has to be reasonable, obviously, but typically a couple of weeks. So, yeah.
In reference to signage that was done quite a while back before the codes might have changed, are they considered grandfathered in until the sign needs to be changed or altered?
Yeah, largely they would be legal non-conforming uses, and that's the other thing we're doing is back on that chart that you couldn't read, there was a category called no violation, and what no violation basically means is that we have gone to businesses and we're sort of documenting the signage that they have, so that in the future we can come back and we can have a record and show what the non-conforming use looked like. So if something gets changed and it still does not comply, then it would be